Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of our weekly Rashi study class, Megillat, Esther, with Rabbi Rebecca Schatz.
We are going to continue. We only did the first verse of chapter 3, so I thought maybe we would continue with chapter 3. And this second verse, is it? We'll see if we get past the second verse. It's a really interesting verse, both in language and also in I think just questions that could be asked about it, both in terms of content and in terms of context. So I'm going to share my screen so that people on Zoom can see the Sefaria sheet. If anybody did not get the Sefaria sheet last time, I have it right here. Anybody in class? Does anybody need it? The worksheet? Okay, great. And anybody on Zoom, you can see it in front of you. All right, who wants to read for us? Okay, you need a microphone. We're going to do the second verse of the third chapter.
Which one we do? 3-1-1?
3-2.
3-2. Bochal hadvei hamelach asher b'sha'ar hamelach korim v'ishtachavim lachaman yechichen sivalo hamelach Mordechai lo yikra v'lo yishtachaveh.
Okay, can you translate for that first?
I tried to read this.
Great.
All the king's courtiers in the palace gate knelt and bowed low to Haman, for such was the king's order concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel or bow low. I have a question: where did we find that the king gave this order?
This is where we find out. This is where we find out about that order.
No, but this seems to be alluding to that the king had already ordered this, but I don't know where that we had seen this before.
Oh, okay, maybe. I think this is the first time that we're hearing about this. This is the first chapter that we're hearing about Haman. So this is and it's only the second verse. So this is the first that we're hearing of this order. It seems like it's telling us that the order was both an order and was put into place. Other questions about this verse? Yeah, Larry.
I'm just wondering about the translation of Kichen Tziva Lo, which the Tziva Lo would seem to me, but maybe I'm wrong grammatically, that's the direct object. In other words, and thus the king, as the king is antecedent, ordered him. Yeah. So who did the king order? Because the translation here is suggesting, and thus the king ordered regarding him. In other words, the king ordered everybody to bow to Mordechai. But if that's true,
to him,
I think it goes with the word Hamelech, right? Ki chen sivalo Hamelech.
So wait, you think the low is what extraneous?
I think so.
Can it be
that's your point.
Can it be it?
Well, before you decide what it can be, all I'm saying is this. If, in fact, the king issued an order at Siva that everyone must bow to Haman, why wasn't Mordechai immediately arrested? In other words, this was not an affront to Haman. Right. This is an affront to the king. So I'm wondering if that's not really the intent, possibly, of the sentence.
Which part is not the intent?
That the king ordered everyone to bow down to Mordechai, to Haman. Because, as I'm saying, maybe redundant. If that were the case and I were Haman, I'd go immediately to the guards and I'd say, arrest this man and impale him immediately because he's violated an order of the king.
Yeah, Norm, is this in response to this?
No, it actually is going back even farther.
Okay.
Because why would the king need to have a special order that everybody should bow down to Haman? It was normal in the Mideast that people would bow down and prostrate themselves before a significantly higher ranking official.
Mm-hmm.
And so apparently there was a pretty widespread reluctance to bow down in that way to Haman for reasons which we have not been told. And it was because of this resistance that Haman went to the king and asked him, according to the Mayam Lois, to add this verdict. And so after that order came out, that edict, why other people proceeded to start bowing down and prostrating to Haman, but Mordecai refused. And the reason is Haman was masquerading as a god and had put some sort of an idol connected to his clothing, so that anybody who bowed down to Haman was necessarily bowing down to this false idol and treating him not merely as a high-ranking official, but as a god of sorts.
Okay, so
And that's why Mordecai wouldn't do it.
Okay, so that was a lot of commentary and a lot of midrash, which I very much appreciate. But let's stick to the verse for right this second, and then we'll get into the commentaries and midrash, just so we don't confuse anybody. Just to go back to Larry's point, does anybody else want to comment on Larry's point before I do? Rebecca, is that why your hand's up? No. Okay.
Yes,
Great.
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
So the sentence says the king's courtiers in the palace.
Yes.
It doesn't say everybody in the whole empire. It just says the king's courtiers. So it was a power struggle between Mordecai and the people that were at his level, I would believe. So that's my take there. And we're going to find out in the next couple sentences what happens between Haman and everybody. So anyway, I don't want to read ahead. The other thing I was going to say was whenever I've sung this, I do go down on Korim and up on Mishtachavim. Korim and Mishtachavim. Because it's like the Aleinu, you know? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Good. So one thing that Rick is pointing out, then we're going to go back to Larry's point for just a second. Stevie has something to say on it, and then I'm going to also comment on it. This idea of Chol Avdei Hamelech, right? Avdei can mean courtiers. What can it also mean? Yeah, servants are just anybody who works for him, right? So it doesn't say the entire city. It doesn't say all people who knew the king. Which is actually when we tell the story to children, we say, and everybody was told that they had to bow down. That's actually not what the Megillah says, right? Everybody who was working for the king or who served the king and who was within the gates of the king, which we're going to talk about in just a moment. Right. That's also really important in terms of context. So hold on, Stevie.
Yeah, I was just going to say that Mordecai, to this point, we've said is in the gates, but we haven't called him as, a government, employee.
Right.
So it's
But he's not inside the gates.
He is.
He's
Inside the gates.
Inside?
Yeah, from chapter 2.
Asher B'Shara Melech, inside or outside, it's at the gates are.
But he's also inside. It says it in chapter 2, verse
19.
Verse 19. It's right before we get to chapter 3. Yeah. It talks about him being inside the gates. I looked that up specifically because that was a question I had also. So I looked it up. Yeah, of course. Okay. Is this to Larry's point? Okay. So let me just say one thing to Larry's point really quickly. So I think that to Larry's point of this phrase, ki chen siva lo hamelech, right? The lo, as Stevie said off camera, off microphone, the lo here probably is extraneous because the sentence ends, as Rick will attest, with the word hamelech, right? It goes from Korim u'mishtachavim leHaman ki chen tziva lo hamelech. The lo here, we don't really know who the lo is or why it's there, especially if it's going to say hamelech. And tziva lo seems to be tziva lo to who? Who's the lo, right? Because at the beginning of the phrase, it's v'chol avdei hamelech. So it seems to be telling us who the tziva lo is going towards, right? That the commandment is towards anybody who is working for the king or within his gates. And so that phrase, to Larry's point, seems to be extraneous or seems to kind of point us in a different direction to what the reasoning behind this verse at all could be, or at least the importance behind what this verse could be. Okay, Diane, and then someone else had a hand. Rebecca, did you still want to say something?
It kind of got said. It was really an emphasis on the fact that it looks like Mordecai now is actually employed by the court.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah.
So lo doesn't have to be a person. Lo could be it for.
Right? But it just would be surprising if it was it, especially in a sentence where we are talking about people, just because lo, if you break it down, right, it's the lamed and then who or oto, right? So it would be like for him or towards him or to him. So yes, it could be it. It seems like it would be, someone who knows grammar much better than I can tell me that I'm wrong, but it seems, to Larry's point, extraneous and also bizarre for it to mean it and to not be some kind of object.
Okay, that was,
hold on one second.
Oh, that was actually not what I wanted to say.
Yeah, no, I know.
So just in the plain meaning of the verse, it isn't at all clear why Mordecai would refuse to bow down. There, without midrash or some other explanation, and Benji Siegel says that Israelite forebears bowed down to foreign royalty all the time.
Right.
So,
which was Norm's point, which is exactly, Norm made that point before. Then he shared with us a little bit of the Midrash and Rashi that we're going to read in a second. But that's exactly right, that there seems to be really no reason for Mordecai to say, no, I'm not going to, especially if he was finding himself, and this is why, to Barry's point, this is why I looked up to see where is Mordecai. Because if he's going to find himself within the walls of the king, he has to assume that he's going to have to follow something that the king is saying, right? And if these are the rules and regulations, then you might not be happy about them, but you still have to follow them. I was talking to someone. I'm going to try to make this as anonymous as possible. I was talking to someone last week who had been asked by security to do something specific, and the person did not want to do what security said. And I said to the person, listen, I work in this building and I have rules that I have to follow by security. Security is the one who tells us what we have to do to make sure that we are safe. That's obviously not the same case as what we're dealing with here. It's not a safety issue. But if you are within the walls of a place where rules are being held, you're not going to bring bacon into Temple Beth Am, right? Those rules are being held for a certain reason. That wasn't the security issue, and you have to make sure that you're following those rules, or don't be within the walls, right? Find yourself elsewhere. Okay, Barry.
This tziva lo, is that singular necessarily, lo, or could it be plural?
Yes. No.
So it begins with kol avdei hamelech.
Right. I think that was partly Larry's point. Right, Larry?
So what's the singular pointing to if the whole phrase is referring to a plural?
I think that was what Larry was pointing out. Is it right?
All the translations. Nobody supports me at all, so I'm wrong. All the translations basically translated as, thus commanded the king with regard to Haman. Right. So the lo means with regard to. So it's not a direct object. It's not I don't know even what it happens to be. My question wasn't strictly grammatical, even though Correct. It is.
Right.
My question is simply, I don't know what you want to call it, contextual, is if it was really a command of the king, and Mordecai violated a command of the king, the text just drops that completely.
Correct.
I don't understand that.
Right. And I think that's the piece here where it's like, well, maybe that's not what's as important, because to Larry's point, if it was super important, we would then have some kind of punishment or some kind of aftermath to it not being followed. And that doesn't seem to be the case, at least in this verse. Okay, Rebecca, and then Rick, and then Stevie, and then Norm.
Going back to the tzivah lo, I think if we think about it the way you would in modern Hebrew, where lo can be replaced, is usually the replacement of bishvilo.
Right.
Then there isn't really a question here, because if you read it as kichen tziva bishvilo hamelech, it's he made this command in honor of him or for him.
Oh, interesting.
And then the question doesn't really come up. So I'm wondering. I think maybe we're overanalyzing it.
Does everybody see what Rebecca's saying? So the word lo here, right, in modern day Hebrew, which this is not, but we can use our knowledge of modern day Hebrew to read into it. You can use the word lo to be like shorthand for the word and the understanding of the word bishvilo, right, for him, or on accord of him, or whatever. So in that case, what Rebecca is saying, and this is not to Larry's point, this is just in general, the grammatical contextual piece of it, is that it would make sense for that to be the meaning here, kichen tziva bishvilo hamelech, right? That it was done for him, the king, right? In which case then all of our wonderings about the lo, as Rebecca said, is being overanalyzed, which this class likes to do. So, if we're just doing what we like to do. Okay, Rick, go ahead.
Of course we do. That's our job.
Exactly.
So, I just wanted to say the end of verse 3, it says at mitzvat hamelech. So there was a mitzvah there. There was a
we're
command.
Not there yet.
I know, but I'm just saying it's there's no wondering, is there really a law or not? Yeah, there's a law.
Yeah.
But what I'm going to raise now is the way the verse 2 is structured. It could have said at the very beginning, the king ordered everybody, or the king ordered the courtiers to bow down to Haman. And then Mordecai didn't do that. So it could have just been straightforward, but it's kind of, it's the opposite, just like everything is upside down in the Purim story. So it could have been really clear, but it wasn't. Maybe it was done in one of his drunken stupor things. I don't know. I'm just speculating.
Yeah. Okay, Stevie, Norm, Marshall, Barry. We're going to be on verse 2 today.
Oh, other people said it.
Other people said it. Okay, Norm.
Okay. We have another ambiguity in this sentence, because the phrase "kichen tziva lanu hamelech," tziva lo hamelech, the to him doesn't necessarily refer to Haman. It actually, according to Rav Yonasan Eibeshitz, refers to Mordecai. The king had commanded with respect to Mordecai that Mordecai did not need to bow down and prostrate himself to Haman. And that's a justification for Mordecai not doing it.
That is a justification.
And it directly addresses the issue that Larry raised. Why wouldn't Mordecai do that? Why wouldn't he simply immediately be arrested and prosecuted and punished? Right.
I think that's. Your son is hysterically laughing. I'm not finding it as funny, but I do. It's a stretch, right? It's what the rabbis do all the time. We ended with this last class, actually. It's what the rabbis do all the time to kind of make sure that things make sense and that things are going the way that we want them to for the different characters of our stories. So maybe. I don't buy it, but maybe. But it is one way of being able to read that line in such a way that it gives us understanding for Mordecai's actions. I'm just not sure that it's accurate, but it is an interesting drush.
And that also explains the use of the future tense, that he should not bow.
That he should not bow? Oh, that he did not bow and he did not kneel?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, just that he didn't. Yeah. Okay, Marshall, do you have your hand up? Wait, hold on. Yeah.
insight into that Rashi.
Okay, did you want to say something before the Rashi, Barry? Okay, hold on. Where are all the microphones? Okay, let's.
I was searching for a grammatical analysis of the word "lo" here,
Oh, all right.
and I'm just reading what it says here. It says a preposition lamed with a third person masculine singular suffix.
At least I got that right. Yeah, that's right.
Literally meaning to him
Uh-huh.
or concerning him, functioning as a lamed of specification or reference. The king's decree specifically targeted Haman for unique honors.
Great. Sione Zevit would be very proud of me that I knew that. That's very good. Everything else when it comes to grammar. Exactly. Okay. Barry, can you read the Rashi for us? And then Marshall's going to make a comment. Of 3, 2, 1. Yeah. Wow. I was like, what is 3, 2, 1? But yes.
Korim mishtachavim she'aseh atzmo elacha levikach u'mordechai lo yikra uvelo yishtachaveh.
Marshall, you're up. Oh yeah, can you translate for us? Sorry, that's a good point.
So we're talking about kneels and prostrated themselves. Because he made himself as a god. This is what Norm was describing earlier. Therefore, but Mordecai would neither kneel nor prostrate himself.
Great. Marshall, you're up.
In contrast to all the theological thoughts, right? Here's Alter's understanding of what's happening. Great. But Mordecai would not kneel. The reason given for his refusal, beginning in late antiquity, is religious. As a Jew, he would not prostrate himself before flesh and blood.
Right.
But that is not self-evident in the text. And Mordecai might well have personal or political motives, refusing to bow down to someone he despises and who he thinks is not entitled to be vice regent.
Okay, so it's one of those is, I think, kind of the common explanation for why he doesn't bow, that according to Judaism, we do not bow towards idols. We're going to see that in the midrash that I brought for the next verse, if we get to the next verse. Or when we get to the next verse, we will get there. And then the second one is really interesting, right? It actually shows what's the word I'm looking for? Like his own inner strength of being able to decide whether or not to do something. Literally taking a knee, right? We all remember that from a few, or however many years ago that was. But this idea that if you don't stand for something, you either do or don't do what everybody else is doing, as a way of standing up for what you believe in. And so it's an interesting, and I think a modern read on why Mordecai might not have done something. The skeptic in me is wondering, would he have felt like he had enough power to not do something because of his own ideas, right? But I would love to think that I'm wrong and that Alter is correct, that he would have felt strong enough in his own beliefs of how the king was running things and proceeding, and that he would feel free and able to prostrate or not. Okay, Rick had his hand up, then Rebecca and Larry and Diane.
So I wanted to add to the explanation as to why Mordecai didn't do it. It could have been, yes, it was because he's not a god. We don't bow down to gods. But as a history major, I love that there's also a historical thing in the JPS, the orange one here on page 95. On page 95, there's a footnote there that's coming up to verse 4, but it's still, as a Jew, he could not bow to a descendant of Agag, the Amalite king. So that brought me back to the verse 1, where it identifies Haman as an Agagite. It didn't have to do that. It could have just said Haman ben Hamdata, but throwing the Agagite in highlights the history that we had a thing with the Amalekites and we weren't going to bow down to them. So I like that history part of things.
That is a very classic example of rabbis wanting us to know the connections in the history as to people's actions, right? And you said it was Art Scroll? Or JPS. So all the more so, right, that I assumed it was a publication having to also connect us back to Torah. But this idea that it was connecting us back to a place in Tanakh, right, that we should understand that piece of Tanakh as well. And that based off of what we know of Agag, why we wouldn't want someone who is a stand is not the word I'm looking for. Someone who represents our community to then bow down to him, right? So that's an interesting example. Who did I call in? Rebecca.
Yeah, I was noticing in the verse it says how the king's courtiers, korim umishtachavim, they knelt and bowed.
Yeah.
Where it says Mordechai would not kneel and he would not bow.
Mm-hmm.
And so would not kneel or bow, as if one or the other, as a compromise, could have maybe knelt without completely prostrating himself as the second step. And so would that have maybe been acceptable to him? It reminded me a little bit of, it's been a long time, but I think it's in Bethlehem where when you would go to see the place where Jesus supposedly was born, you'd have to crouch, bow, whatever, and enter in this low doorway in order to go in there. And so people who would try to walk in backwards or walk in, leaned back and not bow, so to speak, the caretakers would stop them and, because it was deliberately so that you would bow going down. But if it's not with the intent that you're bowing, perhaps it's not really that. Anyway, I just thought.
Oh, that's fascinating. I did not know that. It's interesting. It says Korim Mushtachavim. I mean, the first thing that I always think of when I read this is the Aleinu, and how we say it every day, multiple times a day. But then also when we do it on Yom Kippur, it's all the way down, right? For Aleinu, just on a regular Wednesday, we didn't do that in Daily Minyan this morning, but on the high holidays, not just Yom Kippur, on the high holidays, we get all the way down and we prostrate ourselves, right? That there's this sense of connection and obligation towards God as King that we fully prostrate as opposed to just half prostrating, I guess you could call it, like we do with Aleinu every day. So yeah. Diane, Larry, Greens.
So Benji Siegel offers a couple of other explanations.
Okay, great. Over which part?
Over
Korim Mishachavim?
Right, over his refusal.
Mm-hmm.
One is that he might have just been jealous of Haman's position.
Wow, okay.
The other is that there was competition between ethnic minority groups. So that sort of goes to the Amalekites and the Jews.
Sure.
Possibly.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say that there was when Barack Obama, I think, met Queen Elizabeth, there was a whole discussion about whether he was going to bow his head, what the American president is supposed to do when they meet the Queen or the King, given the history.
Right.
So
interesting.
Comes into modern life.
Yeah, definitely. Well, right. I mean, I think we even have certain ways in Judaism, not bowing, but just showing our bodies as a way of honoring someone. You've probably all seen the custom of if someone is your teacher, that people in the community stand up for them when they have an aliyah. You don't often see that in our community, but which is fine. I'm not asking for people to stand when I take an aliyah. That's not why I said that. But it's just not a common custom is what I'm trying to say. But you do see it. It is written in halakha as a thing, and definitely in the Talmud as a thing that rabbis used to do for other rabbis, right? Is that they would, if their teacher came up to the bima, they would rise because it was a sense of honoring of them. It's the same reason that that when called up to the Torah, sometimes a rabbi is called Morenu, Rabbeinu, right? Just to recognize that they're not just a rabbi, but also a teacher. And so too, right, in today's day, if you were standing in front of someone for whom their custom is to acknowledge them in a certain way, would you bow in a way that their culture is accustomed to them being acknowledged, or would you not? Right. And there are different ways in which bowing is seen as a gesture of respect. It's seen as a gesture of saying goodbye. Right. There's lots of different ways in which it's being used. And so maybe that's where our rabbis get this idea that it really had something to do with his Judaism, because that really is the only thing connected to not bowing towards another human being. Larry.
Wow. Even when they walk into a marketplace. Right, Marshall? Didn't we study that? When you stand up for a teacher?
Oh, yeah. And even in a public place, yeah.
Was it in Kiddushin last? Yeah. Anyways, That's not what I wanted to talk about.
You get a lot of steps in, or a lot of like squats in, if you have to stand every time a rabbi, especially in a place like this where there are 300 rabbis, it'd be a lot of squats.
So I accept all these explanations. It's all good. But as I often want to do, I want to go back to the meta part of the story.
Yeah, great.
Which you say great, but you're going to cut me off when I start to go forward.
I won't cut you off. I'll just remind you that we're not there yet.
You're right. We're not there, but we have to understand what this is motivation for.
Yeah.
So I'm not addressing why you would stand or not stand.
Yeah.
I'm going back to the issue of the king made a command.
Okay.
And Mordechai violated that command.
Right.
So whatever. ChatGPT has a really wonderful answer to me.
Mm-hmm.
Is basically saying, yeah, you have to understand the different motivations and what's going on with the different groups.
Sure.
So Mordechai, we know, doesn't want to bow to Haman.
Mm.
Haman takes it personally,
right?
And he's going to act, as we're going to see,
right?
And that's the whole drive. That whole driving, huh?
It's a spoiler alert,
right? And the other courtiers of the king, they're sort of standing around befuddled. Why have you violated this command of the king? Right? Mm. We're going to see in the next verse.
Right.
And the only one who's absent in any of these reactions is the king. Mm-hmm. So why is the king aloof? Mm-hmm. And it's because the king is aloof throughout much of the story. Doesn't really know what's going on, which is why we so often see him portrayed absolutely comically.
Right.
But the only point that I'm going to argue here is the entire driver of this story is that Mordechai insulted Haman, knowing that Haman would take the actions that he was going to take, knowing that, in other words, it was all part of Mordechai's design. Mm-hmm. So, Barry, this is part of our debate that Rabbi Schatz mentions all the time. So,
just that you two have two different ways of thinking about. Yeah,
I see man's plans. So what I see in this entire story is this is part of Mordechai's brilliance in orchestrating, choreographing the entire story.
Great. I didn't stop you. Stevie.
Just to say that the way this is structured, like
what's this?
The Megillah.
Oh, sure.
That at this verse, you're supposed to be wondering why this is happening, because the next two verses are going to be a discussion about why this is happening. And like what bothers the rabbis, I think, is that discussion doesn't seem to resolve the issue, but without reading ahead. And in fact, it does almost imply that being Jewish is related to it. But without reading ahead, just say, like, we've made a statement that's supposed to look weird. Because, like that's leading into that. Well,
you're saying, like, if we had read verse 2, 3, and 4 together, it would have made more sense.
Well, that's whether it actually makes more sense or not is up to your opinion. But that right now we've raised a question, and like that's what we're supposed to have done.
Got it. Great. Okay, Norm.
I only wanted to comment that while we generally prostrate ourselves only at Musafan Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I believe some Sephardim do it more frequently, and I know that Karaites prostrate themselves when they come to Shabbat.
Correct.
Every Shabbat.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, Karaites, we could talk about this. This could be a whole other class itself. When I was in Northern California, the largest Karaite community in the United States is in San Mateo, which is where I was a rabbi, which is very random. Well, sure, but their synagogue is in San Mateo, yeah. So, which is where I was, which is why I said it. And they would bring rugs because their practice for davening, which they don't call davening, their practice for prayer looks actually much more like the Muslim practice for prayer than Jewish practice for prayer, even though they are very much Jews and are practicing with a lot of the same liturgy as we have, right? They are just Jews who are going by Torah command and not rabbinic command. And so it's interesting to see when you say Korim Mishtachavim or Baruch, right, which is also just a reminder that Baruch, well, the reason we bow at times is that Birkaim are your knees. Berech, right, is one knee. And so it all comes from the same root, and it means to bow. It also means blessed, but the idea of it is that you're using a word that also means to bow. It's how we teach kids that is the word where you bow for things like the Baruchu or the Amidah. But anyway, they go to their knees, right? Because that's what they're supposed to be doing. So it is possible, right, that there's just different ways of looking at bowing. And it's possible, who knows, like Mordechai might have had a practice in terms of bowing when it comes to tefillah, when it comes to prayer. But the idea of getting down on one's knees for the purpose of honoring another person or an idol, as we've all brought up in different ways, was against his religion, which we know and we'll see in the next verse as well. Other thoughts? Yes, Barry.
So, Larry, since you raised it, I'll have to respond. So the book, this Esther, came to us not randomly, but came to us through the rabbinic tradition. The Talmud, it's in there. They had to decide whether to accept this into the canon. And it was accepted into the canon because the rabbi saw in this story the hand of God. Now, one doesn't have to believe that, but that's why it was given to us, this story. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had this story. And what we have here is, at this point here, this is the penultimate, where we have Mordechai needs to incite Haman to what Haman's going to do, which ultimately brings down his own downfall. So this is the penultimate here, that what's occurring.
The penultimate of what?
The keystone of the whole story. It's the causative of what Haman's going to do and what happens as a result. It begins now.
This is the key act which sets in motion everything that happens.
Sure. Yeah, I was just trying to understand what penultimate meant, but yeah, great. Okay, so let's go to the next verse. Is that okay with everybody? We're gonna move with 12 minutes left. I know 2 verses. I hope you can all hang on. Okay, verse 3. Can someone read verse 3 for us? Okay, Larry's gonna read for us. Verse 3, chapter 3.
Vayomru avdei hamelech asher b'shar B'shar HaMelech, LeMordechai Madua Ata Over Et Mitzvat HaMelech. So the other courtiers, the other servants of the king, who were at the gate of the king, said to Mordechai, "Why are you violating this command of the king?"
Okay, Great. One thing I didn't say, I forgot, but thank goodness this verse is 50% of the other verse repeated. So it comes up here too. This idea of Bisha'ar HaMelech is actually extremely important, both for purposes of understanding where we are at in this story, but also as a reminder that this isn't happening for like the entire population outside and around where the king's palace was, right? We don't actually have a sense of how big the Sha'ar HaMelech is. We don't know. We know geographically, if we look at a map now, what provinces might have been invited inside, but we don't actually know how large it was then because we weren't there. So we don't actually know. That being said, it's important in general, and not just for Megillat Esther, it's important in general to know who's actually being affected. And these two verses, to the point that Larry and Barry are making, these two verses, which are going to propel us forward through the rest of this story, are not talking about all Jews everywhere. Right? We're talking about the people who are within the confines of the palace of the king. And that's really, really, really important. So I just wanted to hone in on that. I think it shows how important it is that it says it again. It doesn't just say Veyamru Avdei HaMelech, but it makes sure that we understand yet again, that's the people who are within the gates. Okay, so I just wanted to make that very, very clear. Rick has a hand up, and then we'll see if anybody else has any comments or questions.
Could we see the graphic Nava, how they portray the gate there with this scene? Think that'd be fun?
That's not super depicted in the novel, actually, but it's depicted in Stevie's. Maybe Stevie will take a picture and put it in the WhatsApp group. Does that work for everybody? Or I can show it. I just don't know how clearly it'll come through on the computer. You can come here, or I can take it. Verse 2. I just had to see where. I'm not used to this book. I just don't know how clear. Can you all see that?
Okay, I'll send pictures.
Stevie's going to send a larger picture because I just don't think that my very small screen is doing this justice. But that's one page, and then here's the other. We actually haven't gotten to the rest of this page, but I can't see. Hopefully you saw some of that. Stevie's going to send it in both WhatsApp groups, and Larry already did. So, okay. Marshall needs a microphone.
So it's really the question as to what does the word over mean?
Good.
And here, there's our translation is disobey.
Right.
Alter has another perspective.
Good.
And Alter says the following. Why do you flout the king's command?
Oh, interesting.
Now, like I didn't know what the word impale meant last time, right? I didn't know what the word flout meant.
Yeah.
So I checked Google just now.
Okay, great. And he said?
And Google says, hold on.
Or she. It could be a she.
To flout means to openly and intentionally break or ignore a rule, law, or custom without trying to hide it. It shows a clear lack of respect for authority or guidelines.
Interesting. And the way that it's being written in the verse is that they are accusing him of doing that, right? It's not so clear that that's why he did it, but according to what flout means, we can add a vocabulary word every week. That can be our job. People joke all the time that after Rabbi Kligfeld's sermons, they need to look words up in the dictionary. So we can add dictionaries into this and learn a little vocabulary. So the idea of them accusing him, right, of being openly kind of disobeying, right, of what the king had asked, but in a way that very much so shows his knowledge of how it would be disobeying or would be at least going against the order, which goes back to Larry's point of, okay, shouldn't something have then happened to him if he went against an order of the king? And are we going to ever see that? Is that important? Is this just all part of the grander plan? Diane.
So I'm just thinking about novel reading, because when you're reading a novel, one of the ways of engaging you as a reader makes you say, "What? Why is that going on here?"
Right.
And good writing actually does that. Larry and I have these conversations, especially when we're reading the same book, about, why did this character do this, or how come this wasn't against the law?
Right.
And so in some ways this is just very good writing.
Oh yeah. Right. And I think that partially someone made this point, maybe it was Stevie, made this point about the verse before, that it's really supposed to just bring up questions for us, which is what we're doing in this class. But in general, it's supposed to just bring up questions for us of who and why and how did they get away with it, et cetera, as a way of the reader engaging with what's happening in the text. Any other questions or thoughts about this verse before we go to the Midrash? We actually might not go to the Midrash because we might not have time. Thoughts, comments, questions? Okay. Maybe, yeah, of course, Jennifer. It's just so the people on Zoom, so they can hear you.
Okay, so this is actually going back to verse 2.
Great.
How do we? Verse 2. How do we know when it says Lahaman kichen tzivalo? This was the commandment to him. But then if I read it, Hamelech u'Mordechai lo yichra. It's almost if I interpret it that way, as if both Mordechai and the king don't kneel and don't bow. It's almost a foreshadowing of Haman's trying to gain more and more, usurp more and more power.
Very interesting. Rick is about to explode from his seat, so I'm gonna tell you. I'm gonna tell you what Rick is thinking, which is the answer that I would have given also, which is the etnachta here in the trope, which was put in after the Megillah was written, means that there is a stop. So Hamelech probably goes with kichen siva lo Hamelech, comma, period, semicolon, whatever punctuation. Sorry?
I forgot about the trope.
Right. And then the next part, and the next part goes with Mordechai, right? And then Stevie was just adding on the grammatical understanding that Ichra and Ishtachaver are singular. The other thing I will say, because right, exactly. That's exactly what I was just going to say. The what you just pointed out, Jennifer, I think is a really interesting way for us to recognize, much to Rick's chagrin, that trope was not put in at the same time that this was written. So it is possible, right? Putting grammar aside for a second, it is possible, and you're kind of getting on the Larry or Barry train here, that the way in which this is written is for us to understand what is going to come later in the Megillah, right? Bringing up Melech and Mordechai together, there is something foreshadowing about that in terms of their experience with Haman. So even if the grammar is not making your point, and even if the trope is not making your point, the drash is well taken, and is a very interesting thing for us to think about. Rick, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say, Ben Asher set down the trope at 933. That was his book that put names to all the trope.
Yeah,
and Esther is before, right? It was 400. CE, we said.
I'm very bad at dates, but I think it's after.
You gave us the history thing at the very beginning of class, right?
Right. So I think, everyone's yelling BCE. I think so what you're referring to is after.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, we're not going to do the midrash. I really only brought it to show you that there was no Rashi. It's an interesting midrash, but it's not necessary for this class to move on, and we only have 2 minutes, so I'm not going to read it. But what I will say about it, and you can read it on your own time, is that it is bringing up the different pieces that we brought up, that Norm brought up at the beginning of class, of making sure that we understand that Mordechai is a Jewish figure, and that part of the reason that he would not have done something is because of his knowledge of Torah and of Tanakh, and of the fact that he is a Jewish figure, which is very important, as we know, and as I'll continue to say, for the rabbis. Exactly. And we'll talk about in the next verse. And this particular midrash. Right. This particular midrash wants to make sure that everybody is very knowledgeable about the Torah, including Haman. Exactly. All right. Yehi zichra baruch to Diane's mom. May her memory be for a blessing. And we will meet next week still on Wednesday. Leonard has something to say, though.
Well, since we have a minute.
We do.
I thought I'd mention something about the Church of Nativity.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's on. That great.
That's the church, and that's the church we were talking about earlier with the low entrance in Bethlehem.
Yeah.
Where Jesus was born, supposedly.
Right.
When the church was actually built in the 6th century, the entrance was much higher.
Oh.
And it was only in the Ottoman times that it was lowered down. And the reason it was lowered down is to keep bandits or thieves outside. So you couldn't ride a horse into there or a wagon into there and load it up with all their goodies and take off. You'd have to come in like one at a time, which would make it a lot harder to do.
Wow. Wow. That's very, very interesting. Okay. See you next week. I will add you all to this WhatsApp group. Please feel free to join it. And I will see you on Wednesday next week.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast website or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, please visit www.tbala.org.